Lewis on hell is often a controversial subject. And the reason is, first of all, because even as a Protestant, he seemed to believe in something like purgatory, which isn't hell. It's only the saved go to purgatory. But there's this after-death purgation process, and Lewis seemed to believe in something like it. And so people, when it comes to Lewis on the afterlife, Protestants stumble over that. But even when it comes to his view of hell, there's a kind of tension as we think about hell, between thinking of it as something that God inflicts upon people, so the pouring out of God's wrath, that's what hell is, and the sort of hell is something that human beings choose. It's self-inflicted misery. And Lewis affirmed both. Hell is retributive punishment, wrath of God, but tended to accent almost in everything he wrote the more self-inflicted side. So hell is locked from the inside is the kind of statement that appears frequently. And what that means is that for people who recognize that the Bible seems to talk a lot about the pouring out of the wrath of God, and yet Lewis is talking about hell is something we do to ourselves, that there can be a kind of tension. And I've tried to do a lot of thinking about that because I don't think that those two ways of thinking are mutually exclusive. Hell is something, sinners are thrown there. That's the language of the Bible. Sinners are cast there. They're thrown there into the lake of fire. And at the same time, when Paul describes what the wrath of God being poured out looks like, say in Romans chapter 1, it looks like a increasing process of dehumanization, of God giving us over to our desires and finding that we become less and less and less human. Things come apart. And this is where Lewis is brilliant in his depictions. Hell is an everlasting ruin, a decay, a crumbling, a retreating into yourself, a loss of all rationality and joy, the plunging into misery, but it's a self-plunging. It's a gnawing and an ache, but it's oriented inward, downward and downward and downward into the abyss. And so it is, in one sense, the opposite of heaven. So heaven is this ever-increasing, further up, further in, into joy, into God, into life. And then hell is the opposite of that. It's an everlasting movement away from God. And Lewis can give us very helpful images. So in The Great Divorce, on the one hand, hell is depicted as this endless gray town with millions and millions of houses where everybody is constantly moving farther and farther away from each other because they can't stand each other. They're nasty people, they don't like each other, and they're consumed with self. And yet, when you widen the lens, you realize that this millions of miles of gray town is actually just a crack in heaven's sidewalk. Right? It's so tiny, and that it could, if he says, if that misery could be sort of bundled up, and it wouldn't even give one of heaven's birds indigestion. Like it's so tiny relative to everything else, and that he's trying to show the solidity and the firmness and the reality of heaven over against the thinness and the decay and the movement toward nothing of hell. And I think that there is something instructive for us in giving us an imaginative vision, which he himself knows always falls short. You can't out-horror hell imaginatively. Whatever we can picture, it's going to be that or worse. But Lewis gets us some of the way towards thinking about it.